When the month clicked over, text that had been gibberish turned legible, and Moscow's operations officers started marking up charts. The blindfold wasn't over our eyes, it was over theirs, removed. They could finally see our patterns in real time. Stakes showed up first where silence was doctrine: ballistic missile submarines. SSBNs lived by a rule: be quiet, be unpredictable, copy your broadcasts fast, then vanish. But broadcasts are a heartbeat. With keys and comm routines, the Soviets knew when a boat was likely to copy, which alternates it would shift to if reception dropped, and roughly where it had to be to grab a clean take. That narrowed the ocean from an expanse to corridors. If you know the corridors, you don't need to search everywhere. You wait at the choke points. Action looked mundane on the surface. A Victor-class sub left Polyani on a schedule keyed to US exercises, slid into the North Atlantic, and positioned along lanes American planners favored for weather and propagation. The US broadcast surged with exercise traffic. Soviet analysts flagged the tempo bump and cued patrols to tighten nets. A US SSN sprinted to a retask order. A Soviet boat altered speed to intercept the likely approach, not because of a perfect sonar contact, but because the message rhythm telegraphed the move. From the American periscope, it felt like coincidence. From Moscow's map room, it looked like cause and effect. Carrier groups lost their cloak of timing. Emission control helps, but the ship still lived on message discipline. If a carrier air wing shifted a strike window, the chatter around the strike, even encrypted, created a predictable swell across circuits. With the keys, that swell wasn't noise, it was a tells board. Soviet surface groups and submarines used it to arrive just outside the screen, forcing US escorts to burn daylight hunting contacts they shouldn't have faced there. Human reactions tell you the truth faster than logs. Skippers wrote in patrol notes, shadow appeared faster than expected, or contact reacquired after comms window. CIC watchstanders looked at waterfall displays and shook their heads, too many lucky detections. In wardrooms, officers joked about a jinxed exercise. Jokes hide nerves. The pattern was there, but without a confirmed compromise, nobody could say it out loud. They were reading us. Impact rippled into training. US boats drilled copy and dash, with a new edge, varied antenna masts, and compressed windows. Commanders pushed for spread spectrum options and fallback procedures. But the Soviets adapted too. When Americans shortened copy cycles, Soviet boats shifted to predictive ambushes, setting up along routes where a rapid copy demanded the best sky view. If you knew we had to climb to here, you knew when to listen for us. Meanwhile, something else was happening in the Barents and Norwegian seas. Soviet SSNs began mirroring US deployments with uncanny timing. Alpha boats, fast and brazen, started appearing on the edges of NATO exercises. Aculas later tightened the problem. They didn't always need to track acoustically from scratch. They used the broadcast cadence to be in the right neighborhood, then let sonar do the rest. That hybrid, signals for the box, acoustics for the fix, was lethal. Exercises lost their innocence. Fleet problems designed to test blue versus red became lopsided. Red cells guessed, right too often. Umpires chalked it up to improved Soviet training and hardware, which wasn't wrong. But the hidden accelerant was access to our timing. When an anti-submarine warfare screen looked porous, it wasn't always tactics, it was telegraphed intent. There was one problem for Moscow: they couldn't act too perfectly. If they intercepted every time, someone might suspect a leak. So they throttled. They let some opportunities slide to keep the pattern from spiking. That restraint made detection harder on our side. Analysts saw wins and losses, not a systematic edge. In the aftermath of several hot patrols, US commands issued cautions. Adjust comms windows, vary routes, tighten authentication. Those helped at the margins, but keys are gravity. As long as monthly pages flowed to Moscow, gravity pulled our operations into their hands. The most painful part, the efficiency we prized, common keying, predictable distribution, was the feature they exploited. From their perspective, this was the moment everything changed. A navy that had been a mystery became a schedule. Soviet admirals briefed Politburo members with confidence they hadn't earned from sonar alone. They could claim awareness, and sometimes superiority, not because their boats suddenly outran ours, but because their ears finally understood our language. US crews felt it as a hum of unease. Wardrooms built rituals around comms copy, treated antennas like cursed objects, and trained junior officers to assume compromise without proof. Morale didn't collapse, but trust took hits. When you suspect the ocean is smaller than it should be, you second-guess every order. That's how the blindfold worked at sea, not by dazzling displays, but by turning our quiet into their clarity. And back on land, as anomalies stacked up, nobody connected them to a man who'd been treating key lists like paychecks. Missed alarms, the bureaucratic fog. While boats at sea felt the chill, shore commands felt paperwork. And paperwork is where suspicion goes to stall. Inside the Navy and the wider intelligence world, anomalies cropped up like weeds, each one small, each one explainable. None of them pointed to a warrant officer with a second career feeding Moscow. Stakes first. This wasn't just about leaks. It was about how institutions think. Signals intelligence sat in one silo, counterintelligence in another, operations in a third. Each guarded its lane, each spoke its jargon, and each assumed the others would ring the bell if something truly broke. Meanwhile, sailors lived under a rule. If you can't prove compromise, you don't ground the fleet. Action looked like this. A comment analyst flagged unusual clarity on Soviet reactions during an Atlantic exercise. The note went up a chain that prioritized technical fixes. Maybe our emission control slipped, maybe propagation favored the adversary. A cryptographic custodian reported a minor discrepancy, keying material signed out at an odd hour, corrected later with a clean log. The unit chalked it up to a watchstander who rushed a form. An inspector heard rumors that a particular circuit seemed hot after every key rollover. He recommended tighter handling and moved on. Audits happened, they always do. But audits love checklists, and checklists were tidy. Two-person integrity boxes got checked, safes showed proper seals, burn bags were accounted for and destroyed on schedule. The system's rhythm looked perfect on paper, and paper wins in bureaucracies. If anything looked off, it landed in a category everyone knows too well. Not enough to act, too much to ignore. Culture did the rest. The Navy trusted process. Radio men who lived inside that process were treated like reliable cogs. Suggest an insider leak without evidence, and you're the paranoid one. Suggest a technical issue, and you get resources. So units bought better receivers, tested filters, reviewed comm plans, and kept the machine humming. The human variable remained the variable no one wanted to quantify. Meanwhile, something else was happening at the edges. A few officers whispered after drills about Soviets getting lucky, a bit too often. They wrote cautious lines in post-exercise reports, hedged with maybes. Those lines, buried under pages of lessons learned, didn't climb fast. A liaison at another agency heard a similar story from a different fleet area and made a note. Notes don't arrest anyone. There was one problem nobody could see because it hid inside design. Keys expire fast. Even if you believed compromise was possible, by the time suspicion formed, the month had turned and the sheets had burned. Prove it how? Run a deception. That takes coordination across commands that rarely share raw doubts. And without a single screaming incident, nobody wanted to light that fuse. In the aftermath of a particularly odd Mediterranean patrol, a staff briefing floated the idea of a limited crypto compromise. The proposed response was incremental. Compress copy windows, randomize alternates, increase spot checks. Helpful, but still inside the frame. No one said, "We have a source." Saying that requires more than pattern, it requires a person. Compartmentalization, normally a shield, became a blindfold. Human shops guarded their leads, SIGINT shops guarded their methods, and operational commands guarded their schedules. Stitching those together demands either a crisis or a champion with clout. The crisis hadn't arrived. The champion hadn't emerged. Get this, one investigative memo captured the whole mindset in a sentence. Unusual adversary responsiveness noted. Recommend technical mitigation. That's not wrong. It's just not enough. Because here, what nobody wrote. We may be reading our own mail through their eyes. Auditors returned to vaults to spot-check destruction logs. Everything matched. Supervisors rebriefed crews on safeguarding procedures. Everyone nodded. A sailor who asked a pointed question about whether keys could ever leak heard the standard answer: "Not if we follow the book." The book was solid. The people were the gap. Unknown to them, across town, a separate thread tugged toward the same knot. A phone call would land on an FBI desk that didn't look anything like a SIGINT workstation. It wouldn't come from an analyst or a captain with a pattern chart. It would come from someone with nothing but anger, memory, and a claim that sounded like a domestic dispute disguised as a national security tip. This was the moment everything should have changed, but didn't, yet. The bureaucratic fog held, not because people were lazy, but because systems reward proof and punish hunches. And inside that fog, the ring kept breathing, feeding keys and shrinking oceans. The crack wouldn't open from a memo. It would open from a house where trust had already broken. The divorce, the phone call, the first break. 3 years earlier, something strange occurred in a house where the secrets slept in a desk drawer. In truth, the trail went back much further. In 1968, Barbara had found odd lists and schedules in John's things. She said nothing. By 1984, the marriage had cracked, then broken. She de-lived with the late nights, the cash that appeared without explanation, the plane and the houseboat bought on a warrant officer's pay, and the fights that came with the drinking. Divorce turned distance into anger, and anger sharpened memory. Stakes were not abstract for her. She'd raised 4 kids through transfers and deployments, watched bills stack while John acted untouchable, and now faced a future he seemed to buy his way past. She went through papers like any ex trying to find leverage. Bank slips, business cards, odd lists typed in all caps with dates and columns that didn't look like household budgets. One detail would prove crucial later. She recognized the rhythm of the updates. Monthly, predictable, like a bill. But not a bill. Action started with a call she rehearsed for months. She wavered, told friends, talked herself out of it, then back in. One night, she even laid out tarot cards on the kitchen table, looking for a nudge toward yes. The spread didn't give answers, but it hardened a feeling she'd been avoiding. When she finally dialed the FBI, the story sounded like a domestic grievance. "My ex-husband has secrets. He's been dealing with Russians. He's dangerous." The agent on the line did what agents do, took notes, asked for specifics, pressed for documents. She didn't have a neat folder. She had fragments and certainty. Meanwhile, something else was happening in her head. She remembered nights when he left for work, though he'd already clocked out. She remembered a metal box he guarded, the way he hovered near the phone when certain numbers flashed. She remembered the time he told their son which ratings to choose if he wanted to matter, like he was mapping a path to a vault. Here's the problem the Bureau faced. Tips like this swim in personal motives. An ex-wife can carry grudges. Agents wrote possible domestic motive on a memo and parked it while they checked obvious databases. The first pass came up thin. Walker was retired from the Navy, ran a small security business, looked like a man who'd moved on. Without documents in hand, the call felt like smoke. Barbara pressed. She called again, and this time the words landed heavier. She named equipment. She described the pages, key lists, monthly changes, the burn and replace routine. She talked about a house in Virginia, a plane he shouldn't afford, and a pattern of trips that lined up with calendar turns. The agent hearing it now had context from another corner, whispers about odd Soviet responsiveness at sea. Separate threads began to look like one rope. Impact took the form of cautious movement. The FBI opened a preliminary inquiry, quiet enough not to spook anyone if it turned out to be nothing, serious enough to assign surveillance. They pulled old Navy contacts, asked discreetly if Walker's billets would have touched cryptologic control, and got a yes that mattered. They looked at his company's clients. They found mail drops that didn't fit normal business routes. Meanwhile, Whitworth started to wobble. He felt underpaid and worse, underappreciated. He wrote letters, careful, unsigned, aimed at the same adversary he'd been feeding, fishing for more money and a direct line that cut Walker out. Pride made him reckless. He used phrases only an insider would use. He hinted at product he could deliver without the middleman. A Soviet line officer logged the letters. Somewhere else, An FBI analyst saw the style and tucked it next to Barbara's tip. There was one human moment that shifted momentum. An agent visited Barbara, sat at a dining room table where the varnish bore the rings of old coffee cups, and asked her to walk through the fights, the fines, the timelines. She told him about their daughter refusing to visit, about the threats. "I'll ruin you," and the time she'd almost called years earlier and stopped. Her voice was steady now. Regret had shifted into resolve. Unknown to the ring, a light surveillance net went up. Teams logged John's routes, watched post office boxes, noted a pattern of late-night drives that ended near parks and wooded edges. They didn't move yet. They needed a handoff to confirm scale and tradecraft. But the Bureau had something it hadn't had in all the anomalies and audits: a person. In the aftermath of that second call, the memo changed tone. Source credible, corroborating indicators present. It wasn't a raid order. It was a green light to deepen. The agent who'd once scribbled domestic motive now added locations and times. Across town, a separate squad began baiting the anonymous letter writer with replies that dangled money. 2 threads, 1 knot. Barbara went home to a quieter house, not yet knowing how quickly events would roll. She pulled the first thread. The fabric hadn't torn, yet, but it would. And while she tried to rebuild her life, the men she'd named kept moving on well-worn paths, unaware that a phone call had turned their rhythm into a countdown. Whitworth's letters and the sting. While agents built the quiet net around John and Michael, a second thread started humming, paper words from a man who thought he deserved more. Jerry Whitworth had been the ring's premium source, the one who knew the gear and the rhythm. But years of risk with what he felt were thin payouts ate at him. Pride turned into pen. He sat at a desk, typed careful lines, and mailed an anonymous letter that read like a resume for treason. Stakes were high and personal.